韓国の芸能界と世界中の何百万人ものファンが突然、沈黙が流れた時、感情的な囁きとして紡がれる。軍隊はついに地上に現れた。これまで想像もできなかった方法で、大々的な報道ではなく、長い投稿ではなく会議を通して、ソーシャルメディアではなく、沈黙は波のように、感情が震えるジュンクク。声と目はもう隠せない。彼の不安はついに、ジムの心を揺さぶった一問。あなたと離れたくない。このシンプルなフレーズは、ストレスの多い状況は、物語の中心は今や消え去った。ウイルス感染し、信じられないほどの感情を引き起こした。世界中のファンからの反応、すべては変化の時代から始まりました。ますます激しい活動、個人、距離はしばしば、それぞれの役割の要求が分離し、人間関係のダイナミクスを作る。メンバー間の感覚は異なります。ジョングクとジム彼らの親しさは、訓練時代は秘密ではない。彼らは成長した。同じ夢を共に共有し、ステージ笑い、涙、そして疲労。同じような道を歩む人だけ。理解する。しかし、それはまさに、その親密さのほんのわずかな変化は邪魔をする亀裂のように感じる。安心感。最近では、ハイライトカメラが捉えた瞬間、二人の間に沈黙が流れ、いつもの視線、無理やり作ったような笑顔、そして会話の中断が、タニやステージ裏ではジョングクの感情はもう穏やかではない。彼は不安をこうに表現することはほとんどない。隠れて自分自身を解き明かすことを好む。しかし今回は違った。蓄積された思考の重み、未来について、変化について、誰も歩かない道を歩む可能性。長く続くと彼は、脆弱な点ジムは常に、感情の変化に敏感。周りの人たちもそれを感じていた。彼は、安全な距離を保とうとし、呼吸する空間のないジョングク。それがまさにそれだと気づき、中国をさらに遠くに感じさせる距離。負けるのが怖い。会話が起こったのは計画ではなかった。夜台本なし、観客なし、たった二人。向かい合って座っている友人。静寂部屋の明かりは暗くなった。街のかすかな音が聞こえた。遠くからジムンが開けた。軽い口調で会話をしながら、雰囲気を壊してしまう。でもジョングクは、長い真下を向いていた彼の指は、何かを持っているかのように握りしめられた。溢れ出そうとしていた。ついに彼が頭を上げたが、その目はうつろだった。ドラマのせいではなく、正直だったから、埋もれすぎて、怖い。ジョングクは静かに言った。ジムは黙り込み、スペースを作る次の言葉が出てきた。詰まったような、それでいてはっきりとしたジョングクは、まだ起こっていない喪失感。しかし、日々の影について、一緒にいなくても、home to him, he recognizes that change, is inevitable, but his fear is not in the change itself, but in the possibility of having to walk alone, and there at the height of that honesty, the phrase that now resonates in all corners of the world is said, I don't want to be separated from you, for JIMN, the phrase is not just an expression of emotion, it was the deepest recognition of someone he had cared for, supported, and considered family. JIMN is known for HIS empathy and tenderness, but that night he couldn't hold back the tears, not because they are sad, but because they realize how deep their bond is. He grabbed Jungkook's hand, holding it tightly, a simple gesture full of meaning, without saying a word. JIMN answered with a presence, with a look, that said he understood. This story then spread not as cheap gossip but as a portrait of humanity behind the glitter of the entertainment industry. Fans responded with mixed emotions. Emotion. Deep, and a deep sense of connection. Social media is filled with quotes, analysis, and message of support. Many see this moment as a reminder that, behind the status of global idol, they are still human beings who struggle with the same fears and hopes as anyone else. What makes this story even stronger is the context of Jungkook and Jim's long journey from the early days full of uncertainty, endless practice, painful criticism to the peak of success that demands extraordinary mental resilience. They have watched each other fall and rise, fail and try again. The bond that exists is not something that is easily shaken by distance or busy schedules, but it was precisely because of the magnitude of the changes around them that Jungkook's confession became a watershed, a marker that honest communication is still the main anchor. On several occasions afterwards, fans caught subtle changes. Jungkook's smile seemed lighter, Jim's laughter soon dead, more loose. On stage, their interaction again flowed naturally, as if the burden that had been hanging had now been released. No official statements, no excessive clarification, only togetherness again feels whole. For many, it is more than enough. The story also sparked a broader discussion about mental health and the importance of expressing feeling, especially in an industry that often demands perfection. Jungkook with his courage to be honest shows that admitting fear is not weakness. Jimin with his acceptance affirms that listening can be the most powerful form of support. This message resonates far beyond
fandom touching those who once feared loss yet hesitated to speak out. In the great narrative of their journey, this moment may be just one small point, but for those who watched and felt it, the small emitted a warm light. He reminds us that relationships, whatever they may be, are built on honesty, courage, and a willingness to hold on to one another in the midst of uncertainty. And when Jungkook says, "I don't want to be separated from you," the world is reminded that despite all the accomplishments, what people want most is a sense of belonging and togetherness. Now, this story lives on as a retold story, not to exaggerate, but to celebrate honesty, a moment that may be short, but the impact is long. A recognition that is born of fear, but ends in reinforcement. And for Jungkook and Jim, that night was a reminder that, as long as they dare to talk and hear each other, any distance won't be easy to separate. From the story did not stop at one night of confession. Precisely after these words were said, the dynamics of Jungkook and Jim's relationship entered a quieter but much deeper phase. No flashy changes were deliberately put on public display, but for those closest to them, something was clearly different. Jungkook seemed more open, no longer laughing at his own anxieties or hiding them behind jokes. He began to speak, albeit slowly, about the pressure he felt as a person who is always seen as strong and fine. Jim listened without judgment as he always did, but this time with a renewed awareness that silence for too long could turn into painful distance. In the following days, they returned to a busy routine. The schedule of rehearsals, meetings, and various other obligations continues without compromise. But in between the bustle, small habits appear that were previously rarely realized. Jungkook often waits for Jim to finish first before leaving the room. Jim, who usually walks fast, now often slows down his steps. Those simple things might mean nothing to others, but for both of them, it was a tacit way of saying, "I'm still here." Observant fans began to catch such subtle signals, not through big statements, but from small details that feel honest. A brief look full of meaning, a smile that appears without being made up, or a moment when one seems tired and then the other arrives. without being asked. Social media is, again, full of speculation, but this time, the nuance is different, not a sensation, but a feeling of excitement. Many feel like they are witnessing something real human relationship that survives in the midst of tremendous pressure. For Jungkook, that night's confession became a personal turning point. He realizes that his fear is not a sign of weakness, but rather proof that he cares. During this time, he often puts himself as a support for others, forgetting that he also has the right to be supported. Expressing the fear of losing Jim does not mean that he depends excessively, but that he is honest about the meaning of togetherness in his life. This awareness made him more daring to express himself, not only to Jim, but also in his work and daily interactions. Meanwhile, Jim also experienced no less deep reflection. He was used to being a safe haven for those around him, but hearing Jungkook's fear firsthand made him realize how influential his presence was. There is an emotional responsibility that is not a burden, but a mandate. He learns that taking care of someone is not just about making room, but also about making sure that space doesn't turn into a chasm. Since then, Jim has more often made sure that communication remains open, no matter how small the feelings that arise. This story slowly developed into a symbol for many. Amid a fast-paced world and demands to always appear strong, Jungkook's courage to say, "I'm afraid," and Jim's willingness to respond with empathy serve as a soothing reminder. Many fans shared their personal stories, claiming to be moved to speak honestly to those closest to them after hearing the story. His impact goes beyond music and the stage. He touches the most human side, and grandiose promises were uttered after that night. There are no dramatic oaths or declarations. There was only a tacit understanding that they would try as long as they could to walk side by side. In a world full of uncertainty, the decision to still choose each other every day is the most real form of commitment. Jungkook and Jim understand that the future may take them in different directions, but as long as communication and honesty are maintained, separation is not something to be feared. Until now, the phrase, "I don't want to separate from you," lives on as a gentle echo of their journey, not as a binding promise, but as a reminder of a moment of honesty that saves distance from turning into loss. And amid the unquenchable glare of the world, this story stands as proof that even the brightest stars need each other to keep shining. The continuation of this story finds more and more depth as time passes and the tests come in a quieter, less dramatic, but rather more emotionally draining way. After that confession, Jungkook and Jim did not turn into two figures who always coexist excessively. They remain professional. They keep their boundaries, but behind that there is a new awareness that is growing slowly. That togetherness is not something that can be considered, that it will always be there without being cared for. It's that awareness that makes every meeting feel more meaningful, every conversation more honest, and every silence no longer scary. There are times when their schedules are completely out of line. The days go by without having a long conversation, just a short message or a quick look before parting towards each other's agenda. It was at that time that Jungkook's old fear had slipped back, but this time, it was different. He no longer holds it alone. He learns to believe that expressing longing or fatigue is not a burden to others. Jim responded in his own way, not always with sweet words, but with the consistency of being present when needed. On one occasion that went almost unnoticed by the public, Jungkook was seen sitting in silence for quite some time after training. His face is tired, his gaze is empty. Jim didn't ask much. He just sat next to her, offering her a comfortable silence. Moments like this are actually a continuation of that great confession. It is no longer a spoken sentence, but an attitude that is shown over and over again. A togetherness that is not stormy but strong. The fans who followed their journey from the very beginning felt this emotional change. Many said, Jungkook and Jim's relationship now feels more mature. It no longer depends on intensity but on trust. They don't need to always be seen together to prove closeness. It is precisely the distance that occasionally appears to be a space to grow without losing the way home. Jung himself experienced significant inner development. He began to realize that the fear of loss often comes from the desire to control something that cannot be controlled. With the emotional support he felt, especially from Jim, he learned to let go of excess anxiety and focus on what he could do. Be honest, present, and appreciate every moment. That sense of relief is slowly reflected in his way of working. Bolder, more honest, more emotional. On the other hand, Jim finds new strength in his role as someone who is listened to, not just the one who listens. Hearing Jungkook's confession opened his eyes that even the strongest looking person can be fragile. This made Jim softer on himself. You don't have to be perfect or always strong. He learns that taking care of relationships also means taking care of yourself. This story also develops into a broader narrative about the meaning of separation and togetherness. Jungkook no longer sees breaking up as an absolute end, but rather as a possibility that can be faced with maturity. Jim also understands that true togetherness does not always mean being in the same place, but still choosing each other even though they are on different paths. This understanding does not diminish their closeness, it reinforces it. The phrase, "I don't want to separate from you, now," no longer stands alone as a purely emotional expression. It has turned into a silent principle that guides their attitude towards each other. The principle of not going without talking, not keeping the wound alone, and not letting the busyness erode the sense of caring. Something simple but difficult to live without awareness. Until now, the story of Jungkook and Jim continues without absolute certainty. As life in general, no one knows how the future will take them. But one thing is clear. The moment when Jungkook finally told the truth changed the way they walked. From fear is born courage, from honesty is born calm, and from togetherness is born strength that does not need to be announced. And perhaps precisely therein lies the beauty of the story. Not on the sensation, not on anyone's interpretation, but on one simple truth. That two human beings who care for each other, when they dare to tell the truth and choose to stay, have won one of life's most silent battles against loss before it really comes. And as time goes on, this story no longer stands as one purely emotional event, but rather incarnates into a fine thread that weaves their following days. Jungkook and Jim never went back to discussing the night clearly. There is no need to repeat already fully understood words. Precisely because it is not repeated, its meaning grows. It is present in their way of caring for each other, without making it look like an obligation, in their way of respecting each other's space without feeling abandoned. There was a phase when Jungkook began to be alone more often, not because he was moving away, but because he was at peace with himself. He spends time reflecting, reorganizing what he wants, not as part of anyone but as himself. Jim watched the change calmly, no suspicion. The trust born of honesty makes him able to distinguish between a healthy distance and a dangerous distance. And this time he knew Jungkook was growing that in some moments, Jungkook actually became the first party to come closer. He learned that togetherness does not have to wait to be called. A simple short message, a light question about Jim's day, or simply sitting side by side without a specific topic. Those little things become a new way of saying, "I choose to stay." No dramatic, no demands, only consistent attendance. Jim also felt a change in himself. He no longer puts himself as a mere emotional buffer for others. He began to dare to say when he was tired, when he needed time alone. Surprisingly, that honesty actually made their relationship more balanced. Jungkook doesn't feel abandoned. He feels trusted. They learned that needing each other does not mean having to be ready at all times, but rather understanding each other's limitations. To the public, all this may seem just an ordinary dynamic, but for those who follow with the heart, there is a growing maturity evident. Relationships that were once filled with spontaneity are now overlaid with consciousness. Not that it loses warmth, rather that it becomes more stable. It is not easy to be shaken by small misunderstandings or temporary busyness. At one point, Jungkook said lightly, almost jokingly, that he was no longer afraid of the word breakup as he used to be. Not because he is ready to lose, but because he understands that true closeness is not measured by physical distance or the intensity of the encounter. Jim smiled. To hear it, he knew that the sentence was proof that honest confessions in the past had given Jungkook the courage to come to terms with any eventuality. This story is slowly becoming a reflection for many people about how any relationship, friendship, family or togetherness in a dream requires honest communication, so as not to be cracked by assumptions about how fear, if suppressed, can create more painful distance than separation itself. Jungkook and Jim, with all their limitations as human beings, show that surviving is not about holding back but about consciously choosing each other. The phrase "I don't want to separate from you now" lives not as fear but as intention. Intention not to go quietly. The intention to speak before getting hurt. The intention to keep valuing togetherness without having to tie the future with big promises. And perhaps it is precisely that simple intention that makes this story feel so real and touching. Their journey is still long, with possibilities that are not always easy, but one thing has changed forever. They know that as long as honesty is maintained, no distance really separates. Because in the end, being together is not about never separating, but about always finding a way to get back to understanding each other. And, after all that, what remains is no longer anxiety, but rather a slowly growing calm, a calm that does not come from absolute certainty, but from the conviction that whatever happens can be faced together, or at least with mutual respect. Jungkook and Jim began to live their days in a more balanced rhythm. They are no longer trying to read each other's minds. They are choosing to ask questions. A small change but a big impact. There are moments when old memories come back. The early days when everything seemed simpler and dreams still seemed far away. Jungkook sometimes chuckles at how innocent they used to be, while Jim reminds him that it was precisely innocence that kept them going. Conversations like these serve as a bridge between the past and the present, tying a long journey full of twists and turns with a silent sense of gratitude. The pressure from outside never really goes away. Public scrutiny, expectations and various interpretations continue to arrive, but this time, Jungkook no longer let those voices rule his inner space. It learns to separate what needs to be heard and what needs to be let go. Jim, with his calmness, became a reminder that not everything needs a reaction. Sometimes surviving means staying true to what they believe, not what others imagined. In one very simple moment, almost meaningless to the world, Jungkook once said that he felt at home when he was in the same room with Jim, even without conversation. Jim didn't answer for long. He just nodded slowly, as if to say that the feeling does not need to be proved with words. There lies the strength of their relationship, in a sense that does not always need to be explained. As time goes by, the two realize more and more that the fear that used to haunt them has changed shape. It is no longer a frightening
shadow, but a reminder to stay vigilant to guard what is precious. Jungkook understands that saying, "I don't want to separate from you," doesn't mean holding someone back, but rather expressing the value of togetherness that he wants to nurture. Jimn also interpreted the sentence as a belief that his presence was meaningful, without having to be proven every time. This story has no big climax or dramatic ending. It flows as life flows, with ups and downs that are sometimes stirring, sometimes soothing, but that's where the honesty is. There are no eternal promises, no absolute certainty. There are only small choices made every day to keep listening, to keep caring, and to keep being honest. For many, this story becomes a mirror about how often we are 失うことを恐れるあまり忘れてしまう本当の気持ちを言う適切なタイミングで発せられた正直な言葉。関係を不必要なことから救うことができる。ジョングクとジムンの距離。何かを教えようとして指摘する。感情的な勇気はめったに見られない。しかし、 それは非常に決定的な力です。私は別れたくないというフレーズ。あなたからの叫びハモは、響き渡らない。不安な心の歩みを導く優しい囁き。一緒にいることは、強くなるためには、厳しくなければならない。誓い、囁き声が聞こえる限り、旅は、どんなに遠くても、どんなに重くても、常に生きる理由がある。穏やかな心で、この物語は時間が経つにつれてさらに感じられる。彼らの普遍性を本当に試す。構築された大きなテストではありません。恐ろしいが、普通の一連の、最も決定的な日、観客の歓声もなかった時代、カメラのハイライトはなく、蓄積されただけ。疲労と満腹感。そこに、今日残るという決断は、お互いが最も正直に試される。ジョングクが気づき始めると、彼が今感じている安心感は、ジムンが常に、彼の側にいるのではなく、彼が感じていることは何でも伝えられる。誤解されることを恐れていた。彼は、言葉を頭の中に長く留めておく。彼は疲れている時は疲れたと言いました。彼は行方不明を認めている。正直、かつては怖かったものが、今では、解放したジムも同じ気持ちだった。いつもより長く感じます。鎮静剤、常に最も。彼は自分自身に許すことを学んだ。罪悪感を感じることなく弱々しく見える。彼には、笑顔のエネルギー、ジャンククック。あまり聞かずに受け入れました。それはゆっくりと受け入れていく。彼らの関係を何かに変えてしまう。より堅固な基盤の上に築かれている。期待ではなく現実。時には告白の夜の思い出。傷としてではなく、ジョングクはかつて彼が、その時沈黙を選んだのかもしれない。すべては正常に進んでいただろう。表面ではなく、内部でゆっくりと。その考えは彼に感謝の気持ちを抱かせた。彼は、一晩のちょっとした勇気が、多くの目に見えないものを救った。ジムは実現した。同じことだ。判断せずに切ることは貴重なことです。贈り物彼らの関係は今満たされている。分離が必ずしも損失を意味するわけではない。時には単に形が変わるという意味です。そして形が変化は恐れる必要はない。信頼は維持される。ジョングクはもう震えながら一体感を持った。手は静かに強く握っている。維持するには十分。作るには十分緩い。ジムはそれを見て、心は、もっと平和に、部外者も、このすべて、気づかれないかもしれない。どんな大きな瞬間も、見出しになるが、それがまさに、この物語は現実のように感じられます。小さなことの傍観者。静かに、飲み物のカップと短いメッセージ。寝る前、または、